Tonight, we begin with an economic development that Western officials had feared, predicted, and quietly prepared for. A collapse that unfolded not over months, but in mere hours. Hours that sent the Russian ruble into freefall. Hours that froze billions in foreign reserves. Hours that left the Kremlin scrambling for answers. What Vladimir Putin dismissed for years as Western economic warfare has now crossed a line that even his closest advisors had hoped would hold. And when that line broke, the Western alliance did not hesitate. They responded with unity, precision, and devastating financial force. For months now, there had been signals, not official statements, not formal announcements, just signals that Putin was preparing something desperate. Putin has been defiant, yes, but he has been calculated in his defiance. His moves have followed a certain rhythm, a predictability, almost a routine. But what set off alarm bells in Washington and Brussels this week was that the rhythm went silent. Economists who monitor Russian financial activity know the indicators. The sudden shift in foreign currency reserves, the unusual movement of oligarch assets, the quiet liquidation of Western holdings, the sudden disappearance of economic data from public sources. All of that went quiet. And whenever Putin goes quiet, it means something is about to get loud. Early Tuesday morning, Treasury Department officials detected what they described as catastrophic liquidity failures across major Russian banks, including emergency capital movements that had not been attempted in over 15 years. These are the kinds of financial maneuvers that Russia only deploys when they are signaling something very specific: desperation, capitulation, or preparation for a major escalation. Analysts didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Putin was changing economic posture. And when a nuclear power shifts economic posture without explanation, even by small margins, every intelligence agency on Earth pays attention. The response issued by the G7 tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Official after official leaving emergency meetings described Russia's economic collapse as accelerating, irreversible, and, perhaps most importantly, self-inflicted through years of aggressive isolation. But economic pressure only works if the target hesitates. Putin did not hesitate. He panicked. In fact, his response today was among the most chaotic we've seen in modern Russian history. Here's what we know. Within 6 hours of the new sanctions announcement, the Kremlin issued emergency economic decrees. These weren't the standard currency controls. These were wartime economic measures, tools that Russia only deploys when they are preparing to admit catastrophic failure. Tonight, Reuters confirmed that Russian central bank officials launched emergency interventions across all major financial sectors, including the energy export payment system that had recently been restructured for what analysts believe was sanctions evasion. The West moved before Putin could adapt. They hit SWIFT access for 3 remaining major banks. They hit the shadow fleet insurance networks. They hit the cryptocurrency exchanges that were likely funneling oligarch money. In other words, the West targeted the financial infrastructure keeping Russia's war economy alive, the payment systems that would have made continued aggression sustainable. This is what made tonight's coordinated action so devastating. Putin's economic maneuvering wasn't just symbolic, it was existential. It represented the kind of financial desperation that could trigger internal instability if left unchecked. And Western leaders, understanding that fully, responded with overwhelming economic force. Not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't target civilian banking, they didn't freeze humanitarian channels, they hit weapons financing networks, they hit the oligarch escape routes. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. Intelligence officials now believe that Putin's latest economic moves were designed to test the cohesion of Western sanctions after months of so-called sanctions fatigue rhetoric. Putin wanted to see whether NATO allies would fracture under economic pressure. But instead, the opposite happened. The G7 did not fracture. They announced a coordination package that was so unified, so comprehensive, that even the Kremlin noticed. You don't get Putin's attention easily, but today, the Western alliance did. Economists speaking with major outlets under anonymity described Putin's shift as panic positioning, a way to signal strength while actually preparing for economic collapse. But the West proved today that they remain both vigilant and unified. Their sanctions were not only devastating, they were timed so precisely that Russian markets couldn't prepare. That timing matters because it shows Western intelligence penetration of Russian economic planning. It shows that Putin is not controlling this narrative. He is reacting to it. As reports continued coming in throughout the evening, we learned more about the scale of the Western response. The Treasury Department carried out asset freezes worth an estimated $40 billion, forcing emergency oligarch liquidations. The European Union targeted energy payment mechanisms that had been restructured in the last 90 days. British authorities operating through financial intelligence units reportedly froze London properties used by Kremlin-connected figures to launder war profits. This wasn't just economic pressure. This wasn't just diplomatic signaling. This was coordinated financial warfare. This was strategic economic destruction. And strategic economic destruction is the one thing Putin has struggled to counter since 2022. For every sanction workaround he has developed, the West has countered with something that closes 3 more loopholes. Remember, Putin thought the West would lose interest. He thought sanctions fatigue would weaken resolve. He thought rising energy prices would fracture European unity. But tonight, the exact opposite is happening. European unity is at historic highs. American commitment has strengthened, and the Russian economy is showing cracks that cannot be hidden. What makes this moment so critical and so dangerous is that Putin's latest moves happened at a time when he's under unprecedented domestic pressure. Military hardliners want escalation. Economic elites want negotiation. Regional governors want resources. Security services want stability. Putin is balancing these demands while his economy burns. And when leaders in that position make sudden moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. The White House statement, now circulating globally, was designed to signal that America is not willing to allow Russian economic adaptation. Officials said plainly that Putin's economic maneuvering was inconsistent with any genuine interest in peace. That is diplomatic language for, we see what you're doing and we're shutting it down. You don't usually hear that tone from Washington unless something serious is at stake. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed his nation in a calm, resolute speech tonight. He said, "They told us sanctions wouldn't work. Today, we see the truth." He said, "Russia's economy is not collapsing tomorrow. It is collapsing now." And he said, "Every day Putin continues this war, his country pays a price it cannot afford." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a leader who understands just how high the stakes have become. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Putin's latest moves weren't isolated. Along with the emergency economic measures, Russian state media also launched unprecedented domestic propaganda campaigns. Kremlin officials began preparing public narratives about Western economic terrorism. Russian cyber units increased attacks targeting Western financial infrastructure. All of this happened within the same 72-hour window. When Putin moves multiple pieces at once, it means something larger is underway. Analysts are now considering several possibilities. One is that Putin is preparing for prolonged economic isolation. Another is that Putin is attempting to create domestic justification for further escalation. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Putin is attempting to trigger a global economic crisis to pressure the West into negotiations. But today, the G7 took that card off the table. They didn't hesitate, they didn't negotiate, they didn't show weakness. They struck with coordinated, devastating economic force. What we're watching now is a test of endurance. Putin wants to see whether Western unity will crack. The West wants to show that economic pressure is permanent. Europe wants to prevent energy blackmail, and America wants to prevent Russian victory. Tonight, we've heard from intelligence sources